I thought I'd explain my rationale for opting out of arbitration with, Nintendo and sending them that letter anyways. So I read over it. I said the primary reason too that I decided to go through the trouble of sending them a letter opting out of the arbitration clause is that we unfortunately live under the auspices of a legal system that any expert on, in fact, even a layperson like myself, because we listen to the experts, would tell you it happens to be an adversarial in nature, which translated for us lay people, effectively, the implications of it are that it always pits two parties against each other on the theory that the best man will prevail in a fair system and has a judge, enforce the rules, that trials and everything else are supposed to take place within the confines of. He's kind of like the referee on a sports game. But as these two parties are in open conflict in the courts, effectively it has to do with the law. If it has to do with the law, it's a zero sum conflict. There are no win win kinds of situations in our legal system. I can only win in the legal system by triumphing over and crushing the other side. If they benefit or I do, it's always at the expense of each other. And so Nintendo would like me to be under arbitration, but that is good for their bottom line, and yet it's awful for mine. Essentially, if Nintendo messes up in any way, they're like, if, for example, there's another Joy-Con issue, as one of the famous examples, the Joy-Con drift problem that showed up, or hardware issues that don't have anything to do with the Joy-Con. God forbid, if I sign my rights to it in court away, that is not in my material best interest at all. And in fact, honestly, to be real with you, the likely outage that I'm out is probably an amount that's within fair use. But not fair use, but within a small claims amount. But anyways, I'm just protecting myself. It's an act of self-preservation. If something goes wrong, if something does go wrong, I want to be protected. It's not really that something is going to go wrong. It's insurance. I'm not likely to actually need to sue them for any reason, but God forbid if it comes to it, I'm not going to want to be under arbitration. Side note, despite everything that I've said and shared with you about them bricking people's systems if they catch them doing something that they don't like, I must confer upon you the ultimate reality of this situation is one in which I'm not really particularly concerned about having to take them to court because they close off my access to the web, particularly given the reality of, yeah, god damn it. This situation, which is to say that these two DNS servers, that are unusable here, these servers that I'm displaying on screen and no problem putting in the underbar, they are what is referred to as a DNS sinkhole. And for anybody who is a layperson to technology, to explain what all that means. Now, we have to get into what an internet protocol address is. It's a unique identifier that we use to route data packets around the internet. So that we know their destination. That's what like. It would be equivalent to your phone number, but it's your computer's version of a phone number. That's what an IP address is. Now, back in the day, like circa 99 or so, if you wanted to connect to a website, there were two ways to do it. You could go to its domain name, which would be like something like www.google.com, for example, or many of us access this particular corner of the web not through an app on our phone, but through www.youtube.com. And that was one way to do it. But now, if I if I open up my shell to use a command here on the command line. Oh god, I've got an update. But if I were to ping YouTube.com, so that it just tests the server, it sends a little small data packet, to them and sends it back. Now, what you're seeing on the screen is an IP version 6, reply that's coming back to me. So this is IP version 6 that's telling me what their IP address is. Now, it's apparently using version 6, which is impressive. I would not have expected that, but, most people and most connections are still on version 4. But that is effectively the hidden sequence of digits that, signify, youtube.com. That is its IP address of the website, essentially. Now, most people, this bit of text right here, this 2607, colon 48B0. Now, most people's eyes are going to glaze over in boredom on that, and also they're not going to memorize that. They're not. That's just too difficult for the human mind to comprehend and memorize, but YouTube.com is memorizable. And so a decision was made ultimately to take that bit of data and obscure it from visibility to the end user so that you access it via an alias, which is it's just a representation of it. So you go to the website www.youtube.com instead of pointing your browser at that. And in today's age, if you were to point your browser directly at that, it would do no port 80, I believe, for HTTP. That's odd. 80. So, oh wow, it's trying to search for it rather than navigate to. Not. That's not what I'm asking you to do. That's an irritant. So let's try that now. Yeah, it's for some reason it's programmed to search instead of navigate. www. So yeah, you really can't go directly to an IP address anymore, even if you were to use the standard convention to, you access the exact port. It's just gonna, your browser these days is just gonna dump YouTube, Google, if you try doing that, in particular. But let's try to find like a more IPv4 ping www.animebytes.tv, version, 4 of this, and so let's go to, and let's specify port 80 for the HTTP, continue to direct IP address, see, so this is Cloudflare, and many sites are using Cloudflare protection to do this, and so direct IP access is not allowed, basically, because they don't want people to be able to essentially DDoS them, and because of modern web DDoS protections, you are not able to access websites this way, usually, for the most part, in our modern reality. But even back then, this sequence of digits was too unintuitive for a person to memorize, and so they used URLs to obscure this reality to people. And I realize that I've gone on in this subject for a bit too long, but what the DNS server and tables do is they associate this string of digits to this, this string of digits here to this domain name, and they both mean essentially the same thing. This is an alias that refers to this, And so effectively, what that means and makes DNS is it's the phone book for your computer and for the internet. Broadly speaking, that would be what it would be analogous to. So that's DNS and everything. And what these IPs are is they are DNS servers. And these are the servers that the internet uses to dial in. So it connects to one of these and it looks up in its table to find its records, to find what IPs are referred to, and that's what the browser does behind the scenes, underneath the hood, to access those things. And so, Nintendo and the video game console is the same way. It uses a DNS server to do this. Now, for years and years and years, the companies have been, essentially suing DNS server providers in order to try to get them to, poison and what DNS poisoning is you make like, so if the association for Anime Bytes was to one for you know you know was to point there, and these two domain names would be a record that connected them together, so on each separated by a space, one is connected to the other and everything, and it's associated there, the DNS tables and everything, and on a DNS record, if those were connected together, all right, what they would do is they would change this to, something like 000 www.animebytes.tv, so that when you tried to go into that one pirate domain name, you would end up, essentially being null routed to your own network, and it would go nowhere because you're not running a DNS server. You're not running an HTTP server on your home network. So, see, that's what it would do. Unable to connect, you can't establish a connection because it times out, basically. There's nothing there. There's no, I'm not running a HTTP server on my network at all, and so it would just time out and go nowhere. And that would be what DNS, poisoning actually is. That would be what it effectively does. Is it just reassociates the the alias is de-aliased and then replaced with a different alias, which essentially associates those two together, and that would be an example of DNS poisoning, that took place. And these two IP addresses though are poisoned in a different way. This is a response that is like, aha, the the companies, Nintendo wants to, sue, whole countries and the infrastructure that is provided by Google and everybody else to poison their DNS tables, so that it effectively enables a blockade so that people aren't able to access certain domain names that they've put in their notorious markets list. Well, this is a response that basically says, haha, two can play at that. And what this does is it takes Nintendo's servers and it just blocks it associates them to the same configuration. So when your Nintendo would try to phone into Nintendo, and it would try to contact Nintendo to do something like narc on you, that you're a bad boy and you're engaged in piracy, and so it's trying to phone home. It will try to connect to the DNS tables, and it will connect to this server in particular, and the association will be to 121.0.0.1, and effectively the connection will time out and go nowhere, and so it will not be able to narc to Nintendo at all, because the DNS tables have been poisoned to protect your privacy. and so it effectively makes your switch very stealthy in this whole operation. It's like, ha ha ha, two can play at that game, and anyways, so uh that was just what I wanted to tell you in all of this, and to say, Jesus Christ. So yeah, this crap, this bullshit, and I kind of lost track of what I was trying to say here, but yeah. Oh, finally, yes, back on track. I'm not particularly worried about getting caught violating the Yulia with Nintendo, because I'm cautious, and covering my tracks is something that I tend to be fairly good at. And aside, if games won't, play if you don't have them up to the latest version and everything, all that content, it ends up on Torrent Freak anyways. So, I'm not particularly worried about any of that stuff. I don't think I will be caught. Especially since I'll be using the poison DNS tables to block my device from telling Nintendo and narking on me about what I'm doing. I'm gonna be configuring it that way with those IPs, and so when I look at all of this and I see all this, why did I engage in, opting out of forced arbitration, and send them certified mail about this and to this effect? Like I said, it's, Nintendo has a history of hardware failures and releasing substandard products that break down, and at this point, and it happens, and I don't know that I'll be impacted by it. I hope not. I hope that everything goes according to plan and everything. I hope that I don't have to actually utilize this, right that I've asserted for myself. I hope it does not come to that, but I want insurance. I'm protecting myself from an unfair system. The arbitration process is not fair to the consumer.